The first thing I felt was the sting of panic, cold and sharp as a shard of glass in my throat. It was the kind of quiet that was too loud, a dense, suffocating blanket of silence that had swallowed the familiar chirp of birds and the rustle of squirrels. The painted markers on the trees, my cheerful little breadcrumbs of yellow, had vanished. One moment I was following them, my boots crunching in a satisfying rhythm on the fallen leaves, and the next, I was standing in a copse of indistinguishable pines, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The sun, which had been a dappled friend through the canopy, was now slanting low and angry, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to reach for me. I was lost, truly, profoundly lost, on a solo hiking trip that was supposed to be a testament to my independence, and all I wanted in that moment was to hear another human voice. I fumbled for my water bottle, my hands trembling, and took a shaky sip. The water was warm and did nothing to soothe the cold dread pooling in my stomach. Think, you idiot. Retrace your steps. I turned in a slow, desperate circle, but every direction looked identical, a wall of green and brown and deepening gray. The weight of my backpack, once a comforting presence filled with my tent and provisions, now felt like an anchor dragging me down into the earth. This was how people ended up on news reports. This was how adventures turned into tragedies. And then I saw her. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic reveal. It was a shift in the light, a movement so fluid and quiet it seemed to blend into the forest itself. A woman emerged from between two towering firs, her stride confident and unhurried, as if the wilderness was her living room. She wasn't dressed in brand new, brightly colored hiking gear like I was. She wore faded, practical clothing, a dark green shirt and trousers that seemed to absorb the forest colors. A simple, well-worn pack sat snug on her back. Her hair was a long, dark braid that swung with her step, and her skin was sun-kissed, a map of freckles scattered across her nose and cheeks. But it was her eyes I noticed first. As she drew closer, her gaze met mine, and they were the color of the forest floor after a rain, a deep, steady hazel that held no trace of my own panic. They were calm, assessing, and impossibly old for a face that looked to be in its late 20s. She stopped a few feet away, and for a long moment, she just looked at me, her head tilted slightly. I felt seen, not just as a lost hiker, but as a trembling, open book of fear. She didn't speak. Instead, she pointed a finger at my chest, then pointed to the ground at my feet, and finally made a slow, sweeping gesture at the surrounding trees. Then she tapped her own temple with 2 fingers, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. The message was clear, a silent language I instantly understood. You are here. You are present. Breathe. That simple, wordless communication was a lifeline. My frantic breathing began to slow. The tightness in my chest loosened its grip just enough for me to draw a full, shuddering breath. She moved then, stepping closer, her movements economical and graceful. She didn't reach for me, but she stood near enough that I could feel a faint warmth radiating from her, a small sun in the cooling air. She looked from me to a particular formation of rocks I had completely overlooked, then back to me, her eyebrows raised in a silent question. Did you see this? I shook my head, mute with a mixture of shame and overwhelming relief. She gave a single, slow nod, as if this was an expected answer, and not a failure on my part. Then she did the most extraordinary thing. She held out her hand, palm up, not in a demand, but in an offering, an invitation. I stared at her open palm, at the lines etched into it, the faint scars and calluses that spoke of a life lived with hands, not just with thoughts. My own hand, slick with nervous sweat, felt clumsy and alien. What was this? A guide? A pact? Without overthinking it, without allowing the chorus of city-bred cautions to scream in my head, I placed my hand in hers. Her fingers closed around mine. They were warm, dry, and surprisingly strong. Her grip wasn't forceful, but it was certain. It was a connection more intimate than any handshake, a silent promise in the deepening twilight. A single, clear thought cut through the fog of my fear. I am safe. With a gentle tug, she turned and began to lead me. She didn't walk fast, but her pace was steady and sure. She never looked back to see if I was following. She simply knew I would. My hand in hers was my tether, the only real thing in a world that had suddenly become unfamiliar and vast. I watched the way she moved, the easy shift of her shoulders under her pack, the way her boots found secure footing on roots and rocks as if by instinct. She was a part of this landscape, and for this moment, holding her hand, so was I. We walked like that for what felt like both an eternity and no time at all. The forest began to change, the trees thinning slightly, and then, through a final veil of branches, I saw it, the familiar, blessed yellow blaze on a sturdy oak. We were back on the trail. The tension I had been carrying in every muscle since I'd realized I was lost finally, completely, drained away, leaving me feeling boneless and light. She released my hand, and the absence of her touch was a sudden, shocking cold. I flexed my fingers, the ghost of her grip still imprinted on my skin. She pointed down the trail, the direction I knew led back to the main campground, and then she looked at me, her hazel eyes soft in the fading light. She was going to leave. The realization was a fresh stab of panic, sharper than the first. I couldn't let her go. Not yet. Not like this. I fumbled with the clip on my backpack, my fingers clumsy with a sudden, desperate urgency. I pulled out my notebook, the one I used for sketching and scribbling thoughts, and tore out a blank page. On it, I scrawled 2 words, my hand shaking. Thank you. I held it out to her. She took it, her fingers brushing against mine, another electric jolt of contact. She read the words, and that small, quiet smile returned to her lips. Then she reached into a pocket on her trousers and pulled out a short, stubby pencil. Below my scrawled gratitude, she wrote a single word in a clean, elegant script, Alara. Her name. It was a gift. I looked from the paper to her face, committing both to memory. Alara. It sounded like the wind in the trees, like a secret whispered in the dark. I pointed to myself, then to my own chest. Maya, I said, my voice a hoarse and used croak, the first sound I'd made in hours. She nodded, her eyes holding mine. Then she pointed down the trail again, and then to the sky, where the first brave stars were beginning to pierce the violet canvas of dusk. The message was clear, you need to go. Night is coming. I nodded, understanding. But as I took a step back toward the safety of the known path, I found I couldn't just walk away. I turned back, and before I could lose my nerve, I reached out and gently touched her forearm, just above her wrist. The skin was warm, the muscle firm beneath my fingertips. It was a touch of gratitude, of connection, of something else I couldn't name, a spark that had been struck in the heart of my fear. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, and then something warmer, deeper, swam in their hazel depths. She placed her hand over mine for a brief, breathtaking second, a silent acceptance. Then she turned and melted back into the forest, as silent and fluid as she had arrived. One moment she was there, a solid, real presence, and the next she was gone, swallowed by the shadows between the trees. I was left standing on the trail, the piece of paper with her name clutched in my hand, the memory of her touch burning on my skin, and the absolute, unshakable certainty that my hiking trip had just become about something entirely different. The following days were a blur of routine and restless searching. I stayed at the campground, extending my permit, my solo hiking trip now quietly repurposed. Each morning, I would pack a lunch and set out on a different trail, my eyes constantly scanning, not for wildlife or scenic overlooks, but for a glimpse of a dark braid, a flash of a green shirt, the quiet, confident presence of Alara. The forest had lost its terror for me, but it had gained a new, aching vastness. How did you find someone who seemed to be a ghost of the woods? I found myself noticing things I never would have before, the subtle patterns of animal tracks, the way the moss grew thicker on the north side of the trees, the specific scent of damp earth and pine that now, forever, would smell like the moment her fingers closed around mine. I was learning the language of the forest, hoping it would lead me back to her. My notebook, once filled with sketches of landscapes, now held page after page of a single face, the curve of her jaw, the quiet intensity of her eyes, the way her braid fell over her shoulder. It was a poor substitute, but it was all I had. On the fourth day, the sky turned a bruised purple, and a cold, insistent rain began to fall. It wasn't a refreshing drizzle. It was a drenching, relentless downpour that turned the trails to mud and the world into a monochrome study of gray and green. Defeated, I huddled under the awning of the campground's small ranger station, watching the sheets of water obscure the mountains. This was foolish. She was probably miles away, or maybe she'd never even been real at all, just a beautiful stress-induced hallucination. And then I saw her. She was striding out of the tree lean, not running from the rain, but walking through it as if it were sunshine. She was soaked, her dark hair plastered to her head, her clothes clinging to her frame, revealing the strong, lean lines of her body. She moved with the same unshakable purpose, heading toward a small, weathered cabin I had assumed was a storage shed at the edge of the campground. My heart leapt into my throat. Without thinking, I left the relative dryness of the awning and stepped out into the deluge. The cold rain soaked through my jacket in seconds, but I barely felt it. I walked toward the cabin, my boots sinking into the mud, my pulse a frantic drumbeat in my ears. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, my breath catching. The cabin was a single room, Spartan and simple. A small wood stove glowed in one corner, filling the space with a dry, woody heat. And there, standing before it, was Alara. She had her back to me, her wet shirt peeled off, leaving her in a simple, dark tank top. The firelight danced over the muscles of her back and shoulders, the elegant curve of her spine, the smooth, tan skin beaded with rainwater. She was real, solid, and more beautiful than any of my sketches. She must have heard my gasp or the creak of the door, because she turned. Her eyes met mine, and there was no surprise in them this time. Only a slow, deep recognition, as if she had been expecting me. Water dripped from my hair into my eyes, and I stood there, shivering and speechless, a drowned rat in her sanctuary. She didn't speak. She simply walked over to a small trunk, pulled out a thick wool blanket, and came toward me. She stopped just in front of me, so close I could feel the heat from her body, could smell the rain on her skin and the faint, clean scent of pine. Her eyes were soft, questioning. She reached out and, with a tenderness that made my knees feel weak, began to gently wipe the rain from my face with the edge of the blanket. Her thumb brushed my cheekbone, a slow, deliberate stroke that sent a shockwave of pure sensation through my entire body. It was the most intimate touch I had ever experienced. My breath hitched, and I leaned into her hand, my eyes fluttering closed for a second. This was more than gratitude. This was a pull, a gravitational force I had no hope of resisting. The storm raged outside, a symphony of wind and lashing rain, but inside this small cabin, a different kind of tempest was brewing. Ilara's touch, initially so practical, had shifted into something else entirely. After she had dried my face, her hands had stilled, the blanket falling forgotten to the dusty floorboards. One of her hands remained cradling my jaw, her thumb making slow, hypnotic arcs along my cheek, while the other came to rest on my hip, a warm, steady weight through my soaked jeans. I was trembling, but not from the cold. The heat from the wood stove was nothing compared to the fire she was stoking low in my belly. Her hazel eyes were dark, the pupils wide and deep, holding me captive. She was reading me page by page, and I was letting her. I wanted her to. All the city noise in my head, the constant planning and worrying and second-guessing had fallen silent, replaced by a single, resonant hum of want. She leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't move. I could only watch her, my lips parted, my breath coming in shallow pants. Her forehead came to rest against mine, a gesture of such profound intimacy that my eyes welled with unexpected tears. We stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, the storm outside a distant echo of the one raging within me. I could feel the fine, damp strands of her hair against my skin, smell the wild, earthy scent of her. Then she closed the last infinitesimal distance. Her lips were softer than I could have possibly imagined and warm. The kiss was not demanding or frantic. It was a question, an exploration, a slow, tender seal on a connection that had been forged in silence days ago. It was a kiss that held the chill of the forest and the warmth of the cabin fire, the fear of being lost and the profound relief of being found. My hands, which had been hanging limply at my sides, came up to clutch at her waist, fisting in the damp fabric of her tank top, anchoring myself to this moment, to this woman. When she finally pulled back, it was only far enough to look into my eyes. Her own were shining, a universe of unspoken words swirling in their depths. A single, silent tear traced a path through the freckles on her cheek. I reached up and caught it with my thumb, my own heart feeling too large for my chest. She caught my wrist, turning her head to press a soft, lingering kiss into my palm. The sensation was so electric, so unbearably sweet, that a small, broken sound escaped my lips. That sound seemed to break a final dam of restraint within her. A low, husky sigh, almost a sob, escaped her throat, and she kissed me again. This time it was deeper, filled with a raw, aching hunger that mirrored my own. Her hands slid from my face into my wet hair, her fingers tangling in the strands, holding me to her as if I were the only solid thing in a spinning world. I melted into her, my body aligning with hers, every curve and plane fitting together as if we were carved from the same ancient wood. The world outside, the storm, the reason I had come here, it all dissolved into insignificance. There was only Alara, her mouth on mine, her body against me, and the silent, shattering truth that I was falling, helplessly and completely, in love with a ghost of the woods who had become more real to me than anything I had ever known. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this story, hit subscribe to Sapphic Tales so you don't miss the next one. The world narrowed to the space between that first kiss and the worn wool blanket she spread out before the fire. Words were a currency we had never needed, and we didn't need them now. Our communication was in the language of touch, of breath, of trembling hands and searching lips. My wet clothes became a frustrating barrier, and her hands, those capable, calloused hands, were surprisingly deft as they helped me out of my sodden jacket, my shirt, my jeans. Each new inch of exposed skin was met with her reverent touch, a palm flat against my stomach, making me jump, her lips on my collarbone, her breath warm against my damp neck. When I was left in just my underwear, she paused, her eyes drinking me in. The firelight painted my skin in gold and shadow, and under her gaze, I didn't feel exposed or shy. I felt seen, worshipped. I reached for her then, my fingers fumbling with the hem of her tank top. She helped me, pulling it over her head in one fluid motion. She was lean and strong, her body a testament to a life of physicality. A fine, silvery scar traced a path along her ribcage, a story I longed to hear. I traced it with my fingertip, and she shivered, her eyes closing for a moment. We sank to the blanket together, a tangle of limbs and desperate, gentle hands. The rough wool was a stark contrast to the smooth heat of her skin under my palms. I learned the landscape of her, the powerful muscles of her back, the delicate wings of her shoulder blades, the sensitive hollow at the base of her throat that made her gasp when I kissed it. Her hands were everywhere, mapping my curves, learning the places that made me arch and sigh. When her fingers slipped beneath the waistband of my underwear, her eyes asked a final, silent question. My answer was to guide her hand, to press her palm firmly against the aching heat of me, my own eyes fluttering shut at the contact. She was a slow, deliberate explorer, her touch both confident and infinitely tender. There was no rush, only the slow, building pressure of sensation, the shared rhythm of our breathing becoming one with the crackle of the fire and the drumming of the rain on the roof. She watched my face, reading every flicker of pleasure, every silent plea. When her fingers finally found their way inside me, it was with a certainty that shattered me. I cried out a raw, unfiltered sound I didn't recognize as my own, my hands gripping her shoulders, holding on as the world dissolved into a whirlpool of pure, blinding feeling. She held me through it, her body a solid, warm weight against mine, her lips pressed to my temple, whispering soundless comforts into my skin. As the waves of pleasure receded, leaving me boneless and trembling, I turned to her, my own hands eager to learn to give. I wanted to unravel her, to watch the calm, controlled forest spirit come apart in my arms. I kissed my way down her body, tasting rain and salt and her, a flavor I knew I would crave for the rest of my life. When my mouth found the soft, sensitive skin of her inner thigh, she let out a choked, desperate sound, her hands fisting in my hair. Her control was a beautiful, fragile thing, and it broke with a shuddering gasp as I loved her with my mouth, her back arching off the blanket, a silent, perfect cry on her lips. Later, we lay entwined in the flickering half-light, the storm finally abating to a soft, steady powder. We were skin to skin, her head on my chest, my fingers idly tracing the line of her spine. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, sex, and our mingled breath. I had never known a silence could be so full, so profoundly peaceful. In the quiet, without a single word ever spoken, I knew I had found the other half of my soul. It was a terrifying, exhilarating truth. Just a quick pause. If you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe button and stay with us here on Sapphic Tales. The rain stopped just before dawn. A deep, hushed quiet fell over the forest, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from the cabin's eaves. In that gray, pre-dawn light, I watched Alara sleep. Her face, in repose, was softer, the usual watchfulness smoothed away. Her dark lashes fanned against her cheeks, and her lips were slightly parted. One arm was thrown possessively across my waist, her leg hooked over mine, as if even in sleep she was ensuring I wouldn't vanish. The reality of the coming day began to press in on the edges of our perfect, insulated world. I had a life to return to, a small apartment in the city, a job as a graphic designer that suddenly felt meaningless, a calendar filled with appointments and obligations. What was this? A magical interlude? A beautiful dream I would have to wake up from? As if sensing my spiraling thoughts, her eyes fluttered open. She didn't startle or look confused. She simply looked at me, and a slow, deep smile spread across her face, a sunrise contained in a single expression. She leaned up and kissed me, a soft, sleepy kiss that tasted of night and shared warmth. Then she rose, moving with her innate grace, and pulled on her clothes. She went to the door and opened it, letting in a wash of cool, clean air and the brilliant, almost painful green of the washed clean world. I joined her, wrapping the wool blanket around my shoulders. The forest sparkled, every leaf and needle jeweled with droplets. The air was so fresh it felt like a new kind of breath. She stood beside me, her shoulder touching mine, and pointed to a massive, double rainbow arcing over the valley below. It was a cliché of such staggering beauty that it made my heart ache. She looked from the rainbow to me, her eyes shining, and placed her hand over my heart. The message was as clear as the morning. This is real. We spent the day together in a state of wordless bliss. She showed me her world. She taught me how to find sweet, wild strawberries hidden under broad leaves, placing one directly on my tongue, her fingertip lingering on my lip. She showed me a hidden waterfall, its roar a powerful music that vibrated in our chests, and we stood under its mist, hand in hand, drenched and laughing silent laughs. She led me to a high meadow blanketed in wildflowers, and we lay on our backs in the sun-warmed grass, our fingers laced together, watching clouds make slow, lazy journeys across the impossible blue sky. It was there, in that sun-drenched meadow, that the first shadow fell. A distant, mechanical buzz cut through the natural symphony. A helicopter, small and red, probably a Park Service surveyor, but its intrusion felt violent, a tear in the fabric of our perfect world. Ilara's hand tightened around mine. She sat up, her body tense, her eyes tracking the machine with a look that was not just annoyance, but something darker, a deep-seated fear. That night, back in the cabin, the easy intimacy was tinged with a new tension. I tried to bridge the gap with touch, curling into her side on the narrow cot, my head on her shoulder. I took her hand and placed it on my chest, over my heart, letting her feel its steady, strong beat. For you, I tried to say with my body, "This is all for you." She understood. She rolled onto her side to face me, her expression pained in the moonlight filtering through the single window. She brought her hands to my face, her thumbs stroking my temples. Then she began to speak, not with words, but with her hands. She started with simple signs, her movements slow and deliberate. She pointed to her ear, then made a gesture of something breaking, shattering. Then she pointed to her throat and shook her head, a look of profound sorrow in her eyes. The pieces clicked into place with a devastating clarity. Her silence wasn't a choice. It was her reality. She was deaf and had been for a long time, and she could not speak. The woman I was falling in love with lived in a world of perpetual quiet. Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. Not out of pity, but out of a sudden, overwhelming understanding of her strength, her profound connection to a world she could only feel and see. I took her hands in mine, kissing her palms, her knuckles, her wrists, trying to pour all my empathy, all my awe into that contact. She then made another series of signs, her face hardening with the old, familiar anger. She pointed outside, toward where we had heard the helicopter. She mimed an explosion, her hands flying apart. Then she pointed to herself and to the scar on her ribs. The story was fragmented, told in this brutal, physical poetry, but I understood enough. An accident. An explosion, years ago. It had taken her hearing, her voice, and seemingly her place in the world she had once known. This forest wasn't just her home, it was her refuge. If it kept you hooked, subscribe now to Sapphic Tales so you never miss the next. The truth settled between us, a heavy, shared burden. Her fear of the helicopter wasn't irrational, it was a trigger, a reminder of the violent outside world that had broken her. And I was a part of that world. I was due to leave in 2 days. The thought was a physical pain, a cold stone in my gut. How could I go back to a life of traffic noise and fluorescent lights when my heart was here, in this silent cabin, with this fierce, beautiful woman? The next day was our last full day together, and the knowledge hung over us like a shroud. We tried to recapture the magic of the previous day, but our touches were more desperate, our embraces longer, more clinging. Every look was laced with the agony of impending goodbye. We walked our familiar paths, but the beauty of the forest now felt like a taunt. That evening, as we sat by the lake watching the sunset paint the water in fiery hues, the crisis I had been dreading arrived. A park ranger, a cheerful, middle-aged man with a kind face, came walking down the path toward us. He was doing a routine check of the backcountry permits. "Evening, ladies," he said, his voice booming in the quiet. "Just checking your permits. Beautiful night, isn't it?" I stood up, fumbling in my pocket for my folded permit. "Yes, it is," I said, my voice unnaturally high. Alara had gone perfectly still behind me. I could feel the tension radiating from her like a cold wind. The ranger took my permit, glanced at it, and nodded. Then he looked past me to Alara. "And yours, miss?" he asked, his tone still friendly. Alara didn't move. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the lake, but I could see the rapid pulse beating at the base of her throat. She was terrified. "She's with me," I said quickly, stepping slightly in front of her, a protective gesture. She's staying in the cabin." The ranger's smile faded slightly. "That's not a designated campsite, I'm afraid. It's park property. She'll need a backcountry permit to be staying there, especially for an extended period." He took a step closer. "Miss, can I see your ID and permit?" He reached out, not aggressively, but to get her attention. His hand brushed her shoulder. It was the wrong thing to do. Alara flinched back as if she'd been burned. A raw, guttural sound, the only sound I had ever heard her make, tore from her throat, a cry of pure, animal fear and pain. She scrambled backward, her eyes wide with a blind panic I had never seen before. She looked from the ranger to me, and in her eyes I saw it, the betrayal. She thought I had brought this world to her. I was part of the invasion. "Alara, no," I whispered, my own heart breaking. But she was already turning, fleeing into the trees, her form disappearing into the shadows with the same silent speed with which she had first appeared. "Wait," the ranger called out, confused and concerned. I didn't mean to. "It's okay," I interrupted, my voice shaking with tears. "It's my fault. I'll find her. She's deaf. She was in an accident. Please, just let me handle this." The ranger's face softened with understanding and regret. "Of course. I'm sorry, I had no idea. Is she going to be okay out there?" "Yes," I said, with a certainty I didn't fully feel. "This is her home." He nodded, tipped his hat, and left, leaving me alone on the shore as the last light died from the sky. The perfect, colorful sunset was gone, replaced by a deep, indifferent indigo. I had never felt more alone. I found her an hour later, back at the cabin. She was sitting on the floor in the dark, her knees drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around them. She was rocking back and forth, a small, lost motion that shattered what was left of my heart. She didn't look up when I entered. I didn't try to touch her. I simply sat down on the floor beside her, close, but not touching, mirroring her posture, my own knees pulled up. I waited. The only sound was the ragged pull of her breathing and the frantic beat of my own heart. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the rocking slowed, then stopped. She lifted her head. Her face was streaked with tears in the moonlight. She looked at me, and the raw hurt in her eyes was a physical blow. I had no words to defend myself, and she had no ears to hear them. So I used my hands. I pointed to my own eyes, then to her. "I see you." I pointed to my heart, then to her. "I love you." Then I made a gesture I hoped she would understand. I mimed packing a bag, walking away, and then I clutched my chest as if in terrible pain, shaking my head vehemently. "Leaving you would break me." A sob racked her body. She uncurled herself and launched into my arms, her whole body shaking with silent, racking cries. I held her, rocking her now, my own tears falling into her dark hair. I kissed her forehead, her eyelids, her wet cheeks, whispering promises against her skin that she couldn't hear, but that I prayed she could feel. We made love that night with a desperate, aching intensity, as if we could fuse our souls together through the sheer force of our bodies. It was not about pleasure, but about connection, a last, defiant stand against the dawn. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a vow. When we finally collapsed, spent and entwined, sleep was a fleeting visitor, chased away by the relentless march of time. The morning came, bright and cheerful, a cruel mockery of my internal state. I had to go. My real life, a flimsy and unconvincing concept, demanded it. I packed my bag slowly, each item feeling like a betrayal. Elara watched me, her expression unreadable, a return of the quiet forest spirit I had first met. When I was done, I stood by the door, my pack heavy on my back. She came to me. She was holding something, a small, smooth stone, gray with a single white stripe running through it like a lightning bolt. She pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. Then she took my notebook and pencil from my hand. She opened it to a blank page and wrote, her script as steady and beautiful as ever. The stone is a piece of my heart. Where you go, it goes. You are not lost. You are found. You are here. She pointed to my chest, right over my heart. I couldn't breathe. I pulled her to me, kissing her one last time, pouring every ounce of my love, my fear, my hope into that kiss. It tasted of salt and goodbye. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I knew if I saw her standing in that doorway, I would never have the strength to leave. I walked down the trail, the familiar path that had led me to safety and then to her, and now was leading me away. The stone was warm and solid in my hand, a talisman, a promise. A month passed. The city was louder than I remembered, the air thicker, the colors duller. I went back to my job, my apartment, my life, but I was a ghost moving through it. I was there, but my heart was elsewhere, in a silent cabin in the woods. I kept the stone on my bedside table, and every night I would hold it, tracing the white line, remembering the feel of her skin, the depth of her eyes, the silent language we shared. My notebook was filled with her. Drawings of her, memories of our days, attempts to learn sign language from online videos. I practiced in the mirror, my clumsy hands trying to form the words I longed to say to her. I love you. I miss you. Come find me. It was on a rainy Tuesday evening, while I was sketching her face for the 100th time, that the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I padded to the door and looked through the peephole. My heart stopped. Standing in the dimly lit hallway of my apartment building, her hair damp from the rain, a small, worn backpack at her feet, was Elara. I fumbled with the locks, my hands trembling so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. I pulled the door open, and we stood there, staring at each other. She looked out of place, a wild orchid in a concrete vase, but her eyes held the same steady calm. She was here, in my world. She held up her hands and began to sign, her movements slow and deliberate, a little hesitant, but clear. She had been learning too. YULEFT, she signed. BUTYUTOKMYHERT, MYWRLDISSMALL, YRWRLDISBG, IWNTORWRLD. Tears streamed down my face as I understood. You left, but you took my heart. My world is small. Your world is big. I want our world. I reached for her, pulling her into my arms, into my apartment, into my life. I held her so tightly, breathing her in, the familiar scent of pine and rain and her cutting through the sterile city air. She was real. She was here. I pulled back, my hands coming up to sign the words I had been practicing every day for a month. I love you. A smile broke across her face, the most radiant, unguarded smile I had ever seen. It was a sunrise, a rainbow after a storm, a homecoming. She took my face in her hands and kissed me, a kiss that held all the silence of the forest and all the music of my heart. We had fallen in love on a hiking trip in a world of quiet, and now we would learn to build a new world together, one full of a different, more beautiful kind of sound, the sound of a love that needed no words at all. If it kept you hooked, subscribe now to Sapphic Tales so you never miss the next.